They did not give her a chair. Elder Caius had arranged every detail of the presentation with the efficiency of a man who understood that furniture was a form of language, and an Omega, standing, communicated the correct message before she opened her mouth. The Blood-Crest Covenant needed a bloodline, not a woman, not a mind. A bloodline, delivered quietly and without inconvenient opinions. He had not consulted Victoria Ashwood about whether she had any. She arrived at the great hall on the eve of the new moon wearing the gray shift that marked her rank, the way a blade wears its sheath, temporarily, by someone else's insistence. Snow caught in her dark hair. She did not shake it out. She stood where they placed her and counted the steps to the eastern exit. 43. She had counted them on the way in. The hall smelled of crushed pine and 3 centuries of certainty. It smelled, Victoria thought, like a place that had never once been wrong about anything. She did not shiver. Alpha King Declan Abbott descended the dais the way winter descends, not all at once, but with the complete certainty that warmth was no longer available. Broad-shouldered, dark-crowned, arms folded across a chest that had never learned the posture of uncertainty. He looked at her the way a general surveys terrain he has already decided to cross. His pale eyes moved over her once, cataloging, concluding. You understand what you are here for. Not a question. Victoria understood many things in that moment. The cold bleeding through stone into her feet, the sentinels closing the gap behind her, the entire room waiting for the fold. The fracture. The small collapse that would confirm what they believed she was. She raised her eyes to his. They were steadier than he expected. She watched him notice. Of course, she said, and smiled. Just barely, just enough. She had already decided, before Elder Caius had finished speaking, before the snow had begun to fall. She would not be staying. She counted 43 steps to the door before he finished speaking. Find out what she did with them. He did not look at her when she entered. This was the first thing Victoria registered. Not the obsidian floor, not the 40 witnesses arranged along the walls like furniture, not the torch smoke curling against cold stone. Just the fact of his back, turned, as though her arrival was an administrative detail he was still deciding whether to acknowledge. When he finally turned, it was without hurry. Alpha King Declan Abbott moved through space the way glaciers move through valleys, slowly, completely, leaving nothing unchanged. He was younger than she'd expected and colder than she'd prepared for, and the crown he wore looked less like an ornament than a natural formation, something that had simply grown there over years of uncontested will. He looked at her the way you look at a signature line on a contract. Necessary, unremarkable. You come from the Ashwood line, he said. Not a question. He had the file. He had read it. He had already decided. Secondary branch, no tactical value, moderate genetic compatibility. A pause. Adequate? Adequate. The word dropped into the hall, and no one moved. He clasped his hands behind his back and continued. The Omega quarters, the bloodline ceremonies, the terms of her movement within the walls, the precise boundaries of what she would and would not be permitted to call her life. He spoke without pleasure and without apology, the way a man recites a tide schedule, accurate, indifferent, already true. You are here because your bloodline is useful, he said finally. Not because you are. He let that land. Know your place, Omega. The hall held its breath. 40 witnesses, not one exhale. Every eye in the room angled toward her like a blade, hungry for the fracture, the trembling, the dropped gaze, the small, soft collapse that would confirm everything they had already decided she was. Victoria stood in the center of the floor and felt her pulse. Steady, she felt the eastern door. 43 steps. She had counted them on the way in, the way she counted everything. Quietly, precisely, like a woman drawing a map she intended to use. She moved. The bow was flawless. Spine parallel to the floor, right hand pressed flat to her chest, held for exactly 3 seconds. Every form observed, every protocol honored, nothing that could be named or punished. And yet the hall shifted. She felt it without seeing it, a current moving through 40 bodies simultaneously. The collective understanding that something had just happened that none of them had words for. She rose. She turned. She walked to the eastern door. Unhurried. Upright, without a single backward glance. The snow received her without ceremony. The night closed around her like a decision that had already been made. In the hall behind her, a young sentinel turned to look at the Alpha King's face. He would never speak of what he saw there. Not to anyone. Not ever. She did not know, walking into the dark, that 43 steps was also the exact distance between who she had been inside that hall and who she was going to have to become. The neutral zones smelled like consequence. Cold ash, old blood, the specific decay of things that had died without witnesses. Victoria had read about them in Covenant tactical reports. Clean margins, sanitized language, none of it useful now, none of it describing the way the trees breathed at night or the quality of silence that meant something large and patient was deciding about you. She had been walking 2 hours when the silence changed. Not footsteps. Rogues didn't use footsteps. It was a pressure shift. The specific stillness that falls when every small creature in a forest stops moving at once. She knew what it meant the way she knew most things. Quietly, precisely, without anyone having told her. 2 of them. She mapped them by sound alone. One at 7 o'clock, one closing from the north, bracketing. Patient, experienced. For rogues, also upwind, she adjusted her direction 11 degrees east and kept walking. Same pace, same breathing, her mind running fast beneath the stillness of her face, the way cold rivers run fast beneath ice. The first one came from the tree line without warning. Victoria was already moving. Not away, sideways, dropping low, letting momentum carry past her like weather. The second hit harder. She met the frozen ground with her shoulder, breathed through the pain, rolled, came up gripping a broken branch she didn't remember choosing. She didn't get to use it. Something entered the clearing at a speed that restructured her understanding of the word. Silver-furred, precise, overwhelming. 2 impacts, 2 sounds she filed away without examining, and then silence so complete it rang. The wolf stood between her and the tree line. Chest heaving, eyes holding moonlight like still water holds a reflection. It shifted. The man who emerged was tall and dark-haired, and watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not pity, not calculation, something more patient than either. His gaze moved from her face to the branch in her hand, then back. He had the stillness of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous thing present, and the self-possession not to mention it. Silver Bane territory starts 40 meters east, he said. You're either very lost or very deliberate. Victoria set the branch down, slowly, deliberately. Deliberate, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not a smile. The decision that precedes one. Then come, said Alaric, before the cold makes the choice for you. She followed him east into Silver Bane territory, into the dark between the trees, and told herself that the fact that she couldn't read him yet was interesting, not dangerous. She had been wrong about that kind of thing before. The Silver Bane camp did not look like power. That was the first thing Victoria noticed, and the second thing she understood was that this was entirely intentional. No banners, no obsidian floors, no 40 witnesses arranged to remind you of your smallness. Just firelight and low structures built close to the earth, and wolves who moved through the dark with the easy authority of things that had never needed to announce themselves. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything. Quietly, completely, filing each detail against what she already knew of Blood-Crest architecture. The comparison was not flattering to the Covenant. Alaric brought her to the war table without ceremony. 4 of his lieutenants were already there. Maps spread beneath scarred hands, faces carrying the specific exhaustion of people losing something slowly. She recognized it immediately. She had grown up inside that particular kind of tired. Nobody acknowledged her. She was Omega. She was Blood-Crest. She was, in the arithmetic of this room, a liability with dark hair and uncertain motives. She looked at the maps. 3 seconds. That was all it took. "Your eastern flank," she said, "has been compromised for at least 6 weeks. The Blood-Crest didn't breach it. They don't need to. They've been feeding misinformation through your 3rd scout rotation. Someone in that rotation believes they're protecting the pack. They're not." The room stopped. Alaric's eyes moved to her with a new quality she couldn't yet name. His lieutenants looked at each other the way people look at each other when something impossible has just been said accurately. "The bond fracture started here." She touched the map. "A border crossing, unmarked, unremarkable. This patrol reports to 2 handlers. That only happens when someone is managing a loyalty conflict they haven't resolved yet. It's not treason. It's confusion, which means it's fixable if you move in the next 4 days." Silence. "How?" said Alaric. "Do you know that?" Not a question. The same syntax Declan had used 8 days and a lifetime ago. But where Declan's voice had been a door closing, Alaric's was a door opening. Cautious. Genuine. Wanting the answer. Victoria looked up from the map. "Because no one ever thought it mattered," she said, "that I was paying attention." Declan did not call it a search party. Search implied uncertainty, and uncertainty was not a condition he recognized as applicable to himself. He called it a retrieval. Clean, administrative, already concluded in his mind before the war party crossed the first boundary marker into neutral territory. 12 of his best. He had brought 12 because 12 was more than sufficient, and sufficiency was the only concession he made to caution. He had not expected the first marker to be gone. Not destroyed. Relocated. Moved 11 meters southwest with a precision that suggested not vandalism, but calculation. The kind that took into account wind direction, sightline angles, and the exact patrol rhythm of the Blood-Crest eastern rotation. Someone had studied his borders from the outside and redrawn them without his permission. He stood at the empty post and felt something unfamiliar move through his chest. He did not examine it. They pushed deeper. The neutral zone felt different, wrong in a way he couldn't immediately quantify. His wolves were slowing, not from fear, but from the specific disorientation of men whose instincts were sending contradictory signals. The terrain looked passable. Something beneath it said otherwise. "Alpha?" His lead tracker crouched at a ridgeline, jaw tight. "The scent trails. They've been layered. Someone ran decoys through here. Multiple passes, different directions, same base scent." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. "It's our own technique." Declan said nothing. 3 hours in, They reached the Silver Bane boundary. It had moved. Not dramatically. 40 meters. Perhaps 50. But the fortification along it was something his tactical mind processed and then processed again, because the first reading hadn't seemed possible. Overlapping scent barriers, patrol patterns that left no observable gap longer than 90 seconds. Choke points positioned at angles that suggested whoever designed them had known exactly where the Blood-Crest would enter and had built the welcome accordingly. His lead tracker said quietly, "This wasn't Alaric." No, it wasn't. Declan stood at the new boundary of a territory that had been redrawn by a woman he had dismissed in 4 minutes, and felt the specific cold of a man who has just understood that he moved too soon, concluded too quickly, and left something irreplaceable on a floor he hadn't bothered to look at. He did not say her name. He thought it. The summit had been Elder Caius's idea, which meant it had been arranged with the efficiency of a man who believed diplomacy was simply war, conducted at a table with better manners. Neutral ground, equal delegation, no weapons beyond the ones everyone pretended weren't there. Declan arrived first. He always did. The hall was a converted longhouse at the territory's edge. Low ceilings, pine walls, a long table that had witnessed 40 years of agreements neither side had fully intended to keep. He took the head position without discussion and watched his delegation arrange itself around him with the practiced ease of people who understood that their primary function today was to look like an extension of his certainty. He was certain. He was always certain. The Silver Bane delegation entered at the appointed hour. He counted them from habit, 6, same as his own, Alaric at the front moving with that particular unhurried authority that had always irritated Declan in the specific way that competence irritates arrogance. He catalogued the lieutenants behind him, filed their faces, assessed their formation. He did not immediately register her. That was what he could not explain afterward. Not to his lieutenants, not to himself. The fact that his eyes moved past her once before they snapped back, as though his mind had needed a full second to process something it hadn't prepared for. She sat third from Alaric's right. Silver furs at her shoulders, dark hair unbound, the bearing of a woman who had not revised a single thing about herself to fit the room she was sitting in. She wore the Silver Bane colors the way she had worn the gray shift, as though it had always been her own idea, as though she had simply been waiting for the correct context. Her eyes found his before he could arrange his expression. They were exactly as steady as he remembered. Steadier, perhaps, the way a river is steadier in winter, not frozen, just resolved. She did not look away. Neither did he. That was the mistake he would recognize only later. The moment he chose to hold her gaze instead of dismissing it, he had already lost the first exchange of the summit before a single word had been spoken. Alaric noticed. From the slight adjustment in his posture, so did he. He felt it during the summit's 3rd hour, which was, in retrospect, the worst possible moment for the architecture of his entire existence to come apart. Victoria had been speaking. Not to him, never directly to him, but to the room, laying out a border redistribution proposal with the clean, unhurried precision of someone who had been doing this for years instead of weeks. Her voice was steady. Her logic was airtight. 3 of his own lieutenants were nodding before they caught themselves, and the small, involuntary betrayal of their nods told Declan everything he needed to know about how thoroughly she had already redrawn the landscape of this negotiation. He was not listening to the words. He was watching her hands move over the map. And then it hit him. Not gradually, not as a slow dawning, but as the specific, catastrophic recognition of something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for him to stop moving long enough to feel it. A pull so fundamental, it reorganized the air in his lungs. A certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the part of him that existed before he had learned to be a king. His jaw tightened. He looked away. He looked back. She was already watching him. Not with triumph. That would have been easier to dismiss. With something quieter. The expression of a woman who has just understood something she wasn't expecting to understand and has not yet decided what to do with it. She felt it too. The knowledge moved through him like a blade, clean, cold, and precise in where it landed. He had suppressed it. That was the thing his mind kept returning to. Circling with the grim persistence of a man reviewing a tactical error. He had felt the first thread of it the night she was presented, had registered it as an anomaly, and filed it away under irrelevant and manageable and beneath consideration. He had dismissed his fated mate with 4 minutes of cold instruction and told her to know her place. He had not lost a pawn. He had not lost an asset, a bloodline, a political piece in a game he had already decided he was winning. He had lost his soul, and he had done it with such complete efficiency that he hadn't even noticed until she was sitting at someone else's table, wearing someone else's colors, looking at him like she had already begun to heal from him. He had not begun anything. Elder Juniper did not speak when Victoria entered the trial circle. She simply looked. The long, unhurried assessment of a woman who had watched 100 candidates stand in this exact spot and had learned over decades to read what they were made of before they had opened their mouths or thrown a single punch. The circle was carved from the oldest part of the Silver Bane territory. Bedrock, open sky, ringed by torches that burned without wind to justify it. No audience. Alaric had offered to stay. Victoria had declined. Whatever happened here would happen without witnesses, because the things worth proving rarely needed an audience. Elder Juniper spoke at last. "The trial has 3 parts," she said. "The body, the mind, the soul." A pause waited with something that felt older than the Covenant. Older than the pact system, older than the language of Alpha and Omega entirely. "Most candidates fail the 3rd. Victoria said nothing. She had learned by now that silence was frequently the most accurate response. The body first. Endurance across terrain that seemed designed to locate every physical limit and press it deliberately until something either broke or decided it wasn't going to. Victoria ran it on fumes and precision, conserving where she could, spending where she had to, navigating by the same instincts that had counted 43 steps in an obsidian hall a lifetime ago. The mind second, Elder Juniper's questions, layered and recursive, designed not to test knowledge, but to test the architecture of thought beneath it. Victoria answered in the way she had always processed the world, precisely without performance, following the logic wherever it led, regardless of whether the conclusion was comfortable. Then the 3rd part, the soul. Elder Juniper placed both hands on Victoria's shoulders, looked directly into her eyes, and said simply, "Show me what you're fighting for." And Victoria did not think of the Luna title. She did not think of the Silver Bane, or the treaty, or the territory she intended to hold. She thought of a hall with an obsidian floor. A man reading from a file. One word, adequate, dropped into silence like a stone into still water, and the specific moment she had decided, quietly and completely, that she would spend the rest of her life proving the stone had made the wrong sound. Elder Juniper's hands dropped. "Luna," she said, simply, finally, like something that had always been true. The valley had witnessed 3 wars and 2 treaties in 40 years. It remembered all of them. In the scarred tree line, in the frost-hardened ground that had absorbed enough blood to change its composition, in the specific quality of silence that settled over it when 2 packs stood on opposite ends and remembered simultaneously what the other was capable of. Declan arrived with 30. Victoria had told Alaric to bring 20. The arithmetic was intentional. She wanted him to understand, before a single word was spoken, that she was not compensating for anything. They met at the valley's center as the moon cleared the ridge. Declan looked at her the way he had looked at her across the summit table, with the focused, unwilling attention of a man whose eyes have stopped obeying his instructions. She was dressed in Silver Bane gray, the Luna mark at her throat catching moonlight, standing 2 steps ahead of Alaric's line in the position that required no explanation. She had not dressed for him. She had dressed for the valley, for the record it kept, for the 40 years of history watching from the tree line. He spoke first. Of course he did. "End this." His voice carried the same register she remembered. Low, certain, the timbre of a man accustomed to conclusions. "Return to the covenant. The bond will be acknowledged. Your position will be reconsidered." Reconsidered. She filed the word beside adequate and collateral and every other careful clinical term men had used to describe the space she was permitted to occupy. She reached down. The blade cleared its sheath without ceremony. She pressed the tip into the frost-hardened ground and drew a single line. Slow, deliberate, the length of one long breath, directly between his boots and hers. Then she straightened. "That," she said, "is the boundary of my kingdom." She held his gaze across the line. "Step over it with terms, and we negotiate. Step over it with anything else, and we finish what your covenant started the night you told me what I was worth." The valley held its breath. 30 Blood-Crest wolves, 20 Silver Bane, the moon above all of them, indifferent and complete. Declan looked at the line in the dirt, then at her. Something moved through his expression that she had not seen there before. Not anger, not pride, not the cold, administrative certainty that had defined every previous version of his face. Recognition. Finally, irreversibly, the treaty took 11 days to write. This was not because the terms were complicated. They were, in fact, the cleanest border agreement the Covenant had produced in 40 years, but because every clause had to be built without the language of dominance that had scaffolded every previous document both packs had ever signed. No subordinate territories, no lesser designations, no careful, clinical architecture of who stood above whom and by precisely how many gradations of blood and rank. Victoria rewrote the preamble 4 times, the 5th version she kept. It began, "Between equals, the following is agreed." The signing ceremony was held at the valley center, on the same ground where she had drawn the line. She had chosen the location deliberately. Not for symbolism, though the symbolism was there, but because the valley kept records and she wanted this one kept correctly. June had arrived without announcement, the way good things often do. The moonlight it poured over the valley was different from the cold white of the blood moon, warmer, slower, the color of something that had decided to stay. It caught the auburn in Victoria's hair, the detail she had inherited from a mother, who had also been told, in various careful ways, that she was less than she was. She stood at the table's head, not beside Alaric, not behind him, at the head, in the position that required no negotiation because she had already spent everything required to earn it. Declan stood across from her. He had come without his crown. She noticed this and did not mention it, because some gestures are diminished by acknowledgement. He looked like a man who had spent 11 days in the company of a reckoning and had emerged from it changed in ways he was still cataloging. Quieter, somehow, and more careful with the space he occupied, as though he had recently learned that space was not infinite and that claiming it carelessly had consequences. He picked up the pen. He looked at her before he signed. Not the way a general surveys terrain, not the way a man reads a file, not with any of the versions of his gaze she had memorized against her will over the months of this. He looked at her the way you look at something you almost lost so completely that the looking itself becomes a form of accounting. She held his gaze, steady, resolved, the river in winter still moving beneath. He signed, she signed, the valley recorded it, the moon stayed. She started with nothing they gave her. No chair, no title, no permission. She built everything else herself. If Victoria's story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it. They'll know why the moment they read the first line.